She performed with Mozart. She impressed Haydn. She even lived in the same house as both of them. And yet history completely forgot her. This is the story of a musical genius who was erased. Marianna Martins was born in Vienna in 1744. She didn't grow up in a fancy conservatory. She grew up in what you could call a musical apartment building. Imagine this, living in the same residence where Joseph Haydn, one of the greatest composers of the era, and on their visits to Vienna, the Mozart family. For Marianna, music wasn't something distant. It was literally just upstairs. It was in the air she breathed. Growing up in this incredible environment, Martins took her studies seriously. She wasn't just dabbling. Haydn himself taught her music theory. She studied the Italian vocal style until she mastered it and became a brilliant keyboard performer. Soon, she was a respected pianist and singer, well known in Vienna's most elite musical circles. This wasn't just a hobby. It was professional-level artistry, recognized by the best in the business. As a young woman, her talent was so undeniable that she performed keyboard works right alongside Mozart in private concerts. Think about that for a second, sharing the stage with Mozart. He admired her skill, and Haydn praised her compositions. She was prolific, writing beautiful keyboard sonatas, powerful sacred choral works, and elegant Italian arias. Her music wasn't just written and put in a drawer. It was performed and respected throughout Vienna during her lifetime. But Marianna Martins faced a barrier that Mozart and Haydn never did. She was a woman. In the 18th century, that came with strict limitations. She could perform in private salons for the nobility. She could even get some of her music published. But what she couldn't do was hold official court positions, tour freely across Europe to build her fame, or establish the kind of institutional legacy that secures a place in history. Her career, brilliant as it was forced to remain private. And as we know, history tends to remember the public men. So Marianna Martins didn't disappear from our history books because she lacked talent. She disappeared because the society she lived in wouldn't allow her to become fully visible. She stood right beside Mozart. She learned directly from Haydn, and when the official story of classical music was written, her name was simply left out. During the French Revolution, a woman was arrested and faced almost certain execution. But according to the story, what saved her life was a piano. Her name was Hélène de Montgeroult. Born into the French aristocracy in 1764, she became an exceptional pianist and composer. She was trained in the elegant classical style, but her music was already starting to sound like the passionate romantic era to come. When the French Revolution broke out, her noble background made her an enemy of the new republic. Her incredible talent offered no guarantee of safety. During the chaotic reign of terror, Montgeroult and her husband were arrested. He didn't make it out. She did. Accounts from later years claim that when she was brought before the revolutionary authorities, they demanded she prove her loyalty. So she sat down at a piano. The story goes that Montgeroult didn't just play the new national anthem, La Marseillaise. She improvised a series of powerful, dramatic variations on it. The music was so moving it reportedly stunned everyone in the room. She turned a political interrogation into a breathtaking artistic performance. Now, we can't prove this dramatic scene happened exactly as told, but we do know what happened next. She was set free. After the revolution, Hélène de Montgeroult's career didn't just continue, it soared. She became the very first female professor at the prestigious Paris Conservatory. She wrote a complete piano method book, filled with over 100 of her own compositions, her etudes. Her music forms a fascinating bridge between the worlds of Mozart and Chopin. This wasn't someone who simply survived and disappeared. This was a woman who emerged from the chaos with even greater artistic authority. Maybe the piano really did save her life that day. What we know for sure is that Hélène de Montgeroult not only survived a revolution, but she went on to help shape the future of piano music. Before Chopin made the piano sing like poetry, Europe was already listening to that sound, but it wasn't coming from him. It came from a woman named Maria Szymanowska. Born in Poland in 1789, Maria Szymanowska became one of Europe's very first international piano superstars. She toured major cities, performed for royalty, and built an incredible career decades before Chopin ever stepped onto the scene. Think about that for a second. At a time when it was almost unheard of for women to tour professionally, she wasn't just doing it. She was doing it successfully and very publicly. She was a true pioneer, breaking down barriers and setting the stage for what a concert pianist could be. Now, let's talk about her music, because this is where it gets really interesting. Szymanowska's piano pieces were a radical departure from the strict, formal style of the classical era. She wrote these beautiful lyrical nocturnes, expressive mazurkas and polonaises, and intimate little character pieces that were all about creating a mood, not just following a rigid form. Her style was defined by singing melodies, a delicate and flexible tempo known as rubato, and a deep emotional intimacy. This was the language of early Romanticism on the piano, years before the movement even had a proper name. She was speaking it fluently, so where does Chopin fit into all this? When Friedrich Chopin was just a boy, Maria Szymanowska was already a household name in the musical world. Their circles overlapped in Warsaw, and later in the vibrant musical life of Paris. Here's another fascinating connection. She was the mother-in-law of Adam Mickiewicz, the great Polish Romantic poet, who was a central figure in the same cultural universe that shaped Chopin's own artistic identity. Chopin didn't copy her, that's not the point. But he grew up and developed as an artist in a musical world that she had helped to create. She tilled the soil from which his genius would grow. So why has history largely forgotten her? It's a sad but familiar story. Szymanowska died young in 1831, before the age of recording, and before music history really started writing its official rulebook. Chopin, on the other hand, lived longer. He published more. He became the ultimate symbol of the Romantic piano. And in the process, she became a footnote, a preface quietly erased from the main story. But let's be clear, Maria Szymanowska didn't imitate Chopin. She came before him. She was the one who first proved that the piano could whisper, sigh, and sing with a poet's voice. The world remembered the man who perfected that language, but we should never forget the woman who helped invent it. The sound, that beautiful, revolutionary sound, started much earlier. Before Beethoven shook Europe, Paris was already burning. And the fire came from one man, Henri-Joseph Rigel. Born in 1741, Rigel was trained in the German tradition, powerful, dramatic, and rhythmically bold. But instead of heading to the musical capital of Vienna, he went to Paris. At the time, Parisian audiences loved elegance and restraint. They wanted music that was polite and graceful. Rigel brought something else entirely. He brought energy. So why did he shock Paris so much? Imagine you're at a concert expecting a gentle melody, and instead, you get hit with a wall of sound. Rigel's symphonies were loud, fast, and rhythmically aggressive. They weren't about polished, pretty phrases. They were about raw, forward momentum. Critics used words like forceful and electrifying to describe his music terms you just didn't hear in Paris back then. This wasn't background music for a fancy dinner party. It grabbed you by the collar and demanded your full attention. Decades later, a certain Ludwig van Beethoven would become famous for that exact same intensity. But Rigel was already doing it. He used those strong, unexpected accents. He created sudden, dramatic contrasts between loud and soft. His music had this relentless, driving momentum that just wouldn't quit. For a Parisian audience accustomed to subtlety, this new sound was exciting, but also incredibly controversial. It was a musical revolution happening right in their concert halls. For a time, Rigel was a star in France. His music was everywhere in major concerts, in published collections, and as a soundtrack to public life. He was a household name, but as history gets written, stories often get simplified. Vienna became the city of Beethoven's dramatic fire, and Paris was remembered for its elegant grace. Rigel, who was a bit of both and neither, didn't quite fit into the neat little boxes. He was left out of the story. So Henri-Joseph Rigel didn't lose to Beethoven. He came before him. He was the one who first showed Paris what musical fire sounded like, and then history quietly let him burn out. In the heart of Vienna, one pianist did the unthinkable. He took on Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart in a public duel, and according to those who were there, he won. His name was Joseph Woelfl, and this is the story of the man who outplayed a legend. Woelfl was born in Salzburg in 1773, the very same city as Mozart. He even studied with Mozart's father, Leopold, and quickly developed into a pianist with an extraordinary technique. Woelfl was famous for his gigantic hands, which gave him an incredible reach on the keyboard. He could comfortably span a tenth, an interval that even Mozart struggled with. This physical advantage gave him an edge, allowing him to play with an effortless speed that left audiences breathless. On the keyboard, that kind of reach mattered. In late 18th century Vienna, public piano duels were the ultimate form of entertainment, like a musical showdown. It was in one of these events that Woelfl and Mozart finally faced each other. The atmosphere must have been electric. As the duel began, contemporary reports say that Woelfl stunned the listeners with his sheer clarity, power, and technical ease. His fingers flew across the keys with a brilliance that was almost athletic. Even Mozart's staunchest supporters had to admit something surprising that day. While Mozart was undoubtedly the deeper and more profound composer, Woelfl was the stronger, pure virtuoso. For that one performance, he simply outshone Mozart at the keyboard. So if Woelfl was that good, why isn't he a household name like Mozart? It really comes down to how history remembers artists. History tends to favor composers over performers, lasting works over live impact, and musical depth over pure spectacle. Woelfl's fame was built on being heard in the room, on the dazzling impression he made in the moment. Mozart's fame, on the other hand, survived on the page, in the timeless scores he left behind for generations to discover and rediscover. Woelfl didn't just vanish after the duel, though. His career moved on. He toured all over Europe, composing his own symphonies, operas, and piano music. He later found considerable success in major cities like Paris and London, where his virtuosic playing was still in high demand. But as the popular trend of keyboard duels began to fade, so did his unique advantage. The world was changing, and the kind of dazzling, competitive performance that made him famous was becoming less of a spectacle. In the end, Joseph Woelfl didn't defeat Mozart as a composer. Their legacies aren't even comparable in that regard. But for one electrifying moment in Vienna, he did something almost no one else could. He beat Mozart at his own game, where it mattered most that night, at the keyboard. And as the applause faded, history quietly moved on, leaving us with this incredible story. Some composers struggle early in their careers. Some struggle for just a little while, but the French composer Édouard Lalo struggled for 5 decades. Édouard Lalo was born in France in 1823. Right from the beginning, his path was incredibly difficult. In 19th century Paris, the musical world favored certain things: big, dramatic operas, composers who came up through the official conservatory system, and artists who stuck to established styles. Lalo didn't fit into any of these categories. He trained seriously and he worked tirelessly, but he was almost completely ignored by the musical gatekeepers of his time. For years, Lalo scraped by as a violinist, a teacher, and a chamber musician. He composed constantly, writing symphonies, chamber pieces, and concertos, but getting them performed was nearly impossible. Publishers hesitated to print his work, and orchestras simply passed him over. By the time he reached his 40s, People were still calling him promising, which was really just a polite way of saying he was invisible. He was a ghost in the Parisian music scene. Then everything changed, but not until after he turned 50. In 1874, his violin concerto finally caught the ear of the public and the critics. A year later, he premiered his masterpiece, the Symphonie Espagnole. It was bold, rhythmic, and so full of vibrant color that it was impossible to ignore. Audiences went wild for it. After decades of laboring in silence, Lalo was suddenly everywhere. The name that no one knew was now on everyone's lips. The recognition came, but it came late. Lalo never got to enjoy the long, secure career that many of his peers had. Still, what he achieved was remarkable. He proved that true originality never has an expiration date, that talent doesn't follow a neat and tidy schedule, and that sometimes the official judgment of history can be wrong for a very, very long time. Édouard Lalo wasn't overlooked because he lacked ability. He was overlooked because the system wasn't ready to listen. When it finally did, it was already half a lifetime too late. His story is a powerful reminder that some of the greatest treasures are the ones we take the longest to discover. He took religious vows, lived a life of discipline and silence, and then quietly became one of Spain's greatest keyboard composers. This is the story of Antonio Soler. Born in 1729 in Spain, Soler's path was set from a very young age. He entered monastic life not just for a short time, but permanently. As a Hieronymite monk, his world was defined by discipline, routine, and obedience. Public fame was never the goal. Music, in his world, was meant to serve God, not the self. But a divine talent can't be easily contained. Inside the sprawling monastery of El Escorial, Soler began a secret, intense life of composition. He immersed himself in the study of counterpoint, harmony, and keyboard technique. His natural talent quickly grew far beyond what his church duties required. The problem was, monastic life offered no concert halls. No public recognition, no applause. So Soler composed quietly, almost as if it were a private conversation between him and his instrument. He was a musical genius hidden in plain sight. But despite his isolation, the music that flowed from him was anything but modest. It was electric. He wrote over 150 keyboard sonatas that were bold, rhythmically daring, and incredibly difficult to play. Think of rapid hand crossings that seem impossible, fiery Iberian dance rhythms that make you want to move, and harmonic surprises that keep you on the edge of your seat. These were not simple, devotional pieces for a quiet chapel service. They were full-blown virtuoso works written by a monk who never once sought a public stage. A quiet storm was brewing within those ancient stone walls. Now, Soler wasn't a complete unknown. His music did circulate among court musicians, and he even taught members of the Spanish royal family who visited the monastery. His reputation was whispered about in elite circles, but his identity remained anchored to the monastery. He never pursued a public career. He never left his vows. The virtuoso stayed behind the walls, his fame contained. In the end, Antonio Soler didn't have to choose between his faith and his art. He lived both quietly, intensely, and without compromise. While other composers of his time chased fame across Europe, a monk at El Escorial was expanding the very limits of what keyboard music could be. He reminds us that greatness doesn't always need a spotlight. And sometimes the most revolutionary art is created in the quietest of places. What if I told you one classical composer didn't just write a single symphony, but an entire series based on Greek mythology? No, it's not Haydn or Mozart, but one of their most fascinating contemporaries. His name was Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf, born in 1739. In his day, he was a big deal, a celebrated violinist, a respected court composer, and a sought-after conductor. He was well-known, successful, and moved in the same circles as the giants of the classical era. But Dittersdorf had a passion that set him apart from his peers. He was obsessed with storytelling through music. In the 1780s, this obsession led him to a truly ambitious and radical goal. He decided to compose a complete cycle of symphonies, with each one depicting a story from Ovid's Metamorphoses, the legendary collection of Greek and Roman myths. Now, this was a wild idea for the time. Symphonies were meant to be abstract music, pure form and structure. But Dittersdorf wanted his symphonies to tell epic tale, to paint vivid pictures in the listener's mind. And that's exactly what he did. Each symphony was programmatic, meaning it followed a specific narrative. He used sudden, shocking contrasts in volume, dramatic, racing rhythms, and musical phrases that acted like characters, representing gods, heroes, and mortals. His music captured the chaos of epic battles, the tragedy of humans being transformed into animals, and the terrifying moments of divine justice and revenge. These weren't just vaguely inspired pieces. They were musical mythology, translating ancient stories directly into sound. You could literally hear the myths unfolding. Believe it or not, this groundbreaking project was a huge success in his lifetime. Audiences loved it. They got the references, they understood the stories he was telling, and the symphonies were performed and discussed all over Europe. Dittersdorf wasn't seen as some eccentric outlier. He was seen as a brilliant innovator, pushing the boundaries of what a symphony could express. Today, we often praise later composers like Berlioz or Liszt for creating program music. But decades before them, Karl Ditters von Dittersdorf had already done it systematically, intellectually, and on a scale that was simply staggering. He didn't just write symphonies. He transformed ancient myth into pure sound, leaving behind a legacy that deserves to be heard. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more hidden histories from the world of classical music. Long before Mozart was stunning audiences across Europe, France had its own child prodigy composer. Her name was Élisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre, and somehow, history has mostly forgotten her. Élisabeth was born in Paris in 1665, right into a family of musicians. By the age of 5, she wasn't just playing simple tunes. She was performing complex music for the royal court. Her talent was so undeniable that she was presented directly to King Louis XIV. This wasn't just a cute show. She was introduced as a serious musician. The Sun King himself was deeply impressed, and that single moment would change the entire course of her life. Louis XIV arranged for Elizabeth to be educated and supported at court, an opportunity that was almost unheard of for a young girl at the time. She didn't just learn to play an instrument. She mastered keyboard performance, composition, and improvisation. In a world where women were typically expected to perform privately, for family and friends, Elizabeth was trained to create and perform publicly. That distinction made all the difference. As an adult, Elizabeth did what almost no woman before her had ever achieved. She published her own compositions, intricate keyboard suites, innovative violin sonatas, and even an opera titled Cephale et Procris. With this work, she became the very first French woman to compose an opera, boldly stepping into a creative space completely dominated by men. Her music was a brilliant fusion of Italian virtuosity and classic French elegance, and it was widely admired by her contemporaries. But despite her incredible success, her career was always fragile. Public opera was a risky business, and royal patronage could disappear in an instant. And as a woman, she knew that every failure would be judged twice as harshly. After suffering personal losses and seeing musical tastes shift, her work slowly began to fade from public life. It wasn't because her music lacked quality, far from it. It was because the system simply wasn't built to preserve the legacies of women. Élisabeth Jacquet de la Guerre was never just a novelty. She was a true child prodigy, a celebrated court composer, and a published innovator who broke barriers. Long before Mozart, France had already heard what genius sounded like. It just forgot to remember her. Thanks for watching. Imagine a poor violinist from a tiny village in Bohemia. Now imagine him playing chamber music with Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and Joseph Haydn. This isn't a fairy tale. It's the true story of a composer almost no one remembers today. His name was Johann Baptist Vanhal, born in 1739 into extreme poverty. He had no noble background, no connections, and absolutely no safety net. For Vanhal, music wasn't a hobby or a refined art. It was a lifeline. It was his only ticket out of rural obscurity. He trained relentlessly as a violinist and composer, absorbing everything he could, driven by the need to survive. Against all odds, Vanhal made his way to Vienna, the glittering heart of European music. And there, something truly remarkable happened. He didn't just meet the great composers of his day, he played with them. Eyewitness accounts from the time describe string quartet sessions featuring Joseph Haydn on first violin, another famous composer named Dittersdorf on second violin, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart on viola, and Johann Baptist Vanhal on cello. Think about that lineup. This wasn't a symbolic gesture. It meant that in that moment, in that room, Vanhal was considered their peer, and he earned that respect. Vanhal wasn't just a performer, he was a prolific and successful composer. He wrote over 70 symphonies, countless string quartets, and a vast amount of chamber and sacred music. His compositions weren't just gathering dust either. They were published and performed widely across Europe. For a brief shining period, Vanhal's music was actually performed more often than Mozart's. He was a genuine star of the classical era. So what happened? Why did his star fade while others became legends? Unlike Haydn, Vanhal never secured a stable, long-term court position. Unlike Mozart, whose genius became mythical after his death, Vanhal didn't have a dramatic story to capture the public imagination. He had no powerful patrons to keep his legacy alive. As musical tastes shifted toward the early Romantic era, his style fell out of fashion, and his name slowly disappeared from concert programs. Mozart became a legend, Haydn became an institution, and Vanhal just faded away. But Johann Baptist Vanhal didn't fail. He clawed his way up from nothing, stood shoulder to shoulder with giants, and helped shape the sound of the classical era from the inside. He proves that history isn't always about who was the best, but sometimes it's just about who had the loudest story. So next time you're exploring classical music, maybe give a listen to Vanhal. You might be surprised by the forgotten master you discover. Thanks for watching.